Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello, and thanks for joining us here for episode 456 with Nick Loper. We are talking about side hustles. I think you'll enjoy this chat, even if you are by no means considering any form of entrepreneurship in your life, because he's talking also about the enrichment that this activity can bring to professionals who are keeping their jobs. So you'll learn, 1, how side hustles can empower you as a professional, 2, how to turn your ideas into low-risk side hustles, and 3, when it may just be time to turn a side hustle into your main hustle. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items we've referenced, it's over at awesomeatyourjob.com/F456. While you're at awesomeatyourjob.com, we hope you'll check out some nifty stuff such as the Gold Nugget email list. Here we provide summary insights and wisdom from the guests. I have noted that in the survey, many people say, Pete, this is so many episodes I can't possibly keep up. That's okay. That is all good. It's a buffet. I don't expect you to eat everything. I expect you to eat the things you like the most. But the Gold Nugget email list could be a great way to get a sampler tasting of everything and say, ooh, yes, I would like to hear a full 40 minutes from that individual. That sounds good. Anyway, that's called the Gold Nugget summary emails over at awesomeatyourjob.com. You'll get the goods from each guest as it appears, as well as access to the vault of all 456 Gold Nugget summary tidbits over at awesomeatyourjob.com. Anyway, here's Nick's story. Nick is an author, entrepreneur, and a lifelong student in the game of business. His latest role is as chief side hustler at sidehustlenation.com. He's been making his living online since before it was cool, and along the way, he's picked up a thing or two about small business, marketing, and outsourcing, and he's happy to share that experience with those working hard to make their side hustle dreams a reality. He's the host of the top-rated Side Hustle Show podcast, and where he explores different business ideas each week to help listeners discover the path to multiple income streams. Big thanks to Nick for sharing his wisdom with us, and big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. Here is Nick. Nick, thanks for joining us here on the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm wondering if I'm qualified because I don't know if I've ever been awesome at a job that I've ever had, but appreciate the invite, man.
Well, I think you're awesome as a podcaster and a reviewer. And so I think you're very qualified. And speaking of qualifying, I love the weird segue. I understand you had some success in your early job of swimming, and you went all in with the shaving and everything. Tell us about this.
That's true. I don't know if this was really necessary for the district and state level at the high school swimming. This was not Olympic trials or anything, but was a decent freestyle swimmer back in the day. And what was really fun and interesting about this was being able to continually shave, maybe pun intended, time, as fast as you thought you could go. Hey, this is a dead sprint. And then the next week being able to beat that, and the next week being able to beat that. It was really, really kind of eye-opening. And the coach was like, "You've been dogging it the whole season, man? What's going on?"
Well, that is cool and rewarding. I think that it's really exciting when there is some sort of a, for me at least, there's like a number that's associated with performance. And you do some things and you feel different, but then there's also a number reinforcing it, whether it's a revenue figure or what the scale tells you or something. That just lights me up too.
Yeah, it's a very quantifiable sport. And that was one of my dad's points very early on when I started swimming. It's like, look, you're only really ever racing against yourself. You can't control what the guy in the next lane over is going to do. So just try and beat your best time.
Yeah, it's a good lesson. And another weird segue. You share a lot of good lessons on your Side Hustle Show podcast, and that is a topic of interest for our listeners. So I want you to orient us from the beginning. First, can you define for us precisely what is meant by the term side hustle? And maybe do you know where the term came from? Because I see it all the time now.
Well, for me, a side hustle is anything that you're doing to earn money outside of traditional employment, outside of your day job. And in previous generations, maybe this was called moonlighting or a second job. But to me, there's a more entrepreneurial connotation than just delivering pizzas or bartending as a second job. There's this, upside potential where it's like, okay, maybe this could be more time leveraged, or maybe this could be a business that grows beyond just time for money. And that is really exciting and empowering to me. The side hustle term itself, I found some etymology that dated it to like the 1950s, but it's really been over the last 5 or 10 years where it's kind of become part of the national parlance, I suppose, and has increased in popularity.
That's right. And I guess I find that interesting because I think the word hustling in some communities can refer to, illegal activity. That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's very much, and at least in my case, comes from an old baseball coach of mine who was like, look, you're going to have bad days at the plate, you're going to have bad days in the field, but hustle never slumps. Like, it's the one thing you can control, your own effort. And so that's kind of where the term really comes from me, not like hustling, like out to scam anybody, but like, look, I'm going to control the effort that I can control in the time that I have.
Totally. And you've had a wide variety of side hustlers on your show, and they've got some really fun stories. So I'd love it if you could share with us maybe just a few of the more noteworthy examples of side hustles you've encountered from your guests.
Yeah, there are so many. And a lot of them are kind of in the online business space, like, I built a blog and I sell advertising, or whatever. But some of them are just like plain old brick and mortar, like you hang up the call and you're like, well, crap, I could do that. For example, one guy I met, he called this America's Simplest Business, and he's been in business since the early 80s, just picking up trash from parking lots, and he'd built this to like a $600,000 a year operation by the time we talked last year, and he'd outsourced the trash pickup by that point. But he called it like getting paid to take a walk. And he says it's a perfect side hustle because you got to do it early morning or late at night when the cars aren't in the parking lot. And he'd call up property management companies and say, hey, who handles your litter pickup? And the landscapers don't want to do it. And he had all these reasons why it was a cool little business. So that one comes to mind. One of my favorite guests is Rob, the flea market flipper Stevenson out of Orlando, Florida. Just a crazy take on the buy low, sell high business model. I mean, same business model as Walmart, same business model as every retail store in the history of business. But in his case, looking for really weird, random items that, most people aren't going to give a second look. A lot of cases, big, bulky items that the seller doesn't have room to store, or they're kind of afraid of how much it's going to cost to ship. He's got relationships with uship.com was the site that he recommended for overland, inexpensive cross-country shipping. But he had some crazy stories about, a prosthetic leg for 30 or 40 bucks at the flea market and turning it around for $1,000 the next day on eBay. Like, how do you know what this stuff, and he's like, just walking around looking at what the comps have gone for on eBay, like a Husqvarna concrete polisher, just whatever random stuff he can find. And I asked him, like, are you afraid of the deals drying up? Because he's quit his job. He's doing this full-time 6-figure business. Like, what happens if you don't find the next concrete polisher or the next an exercise bike, like for physical therapy offices? Like, what happens if you don't find that deal? And he's like, look, my limit is not the deals. My limit is like the time and the inventory storage. So I think he ended up getting a warehouse to deal with some of the inventory storage or a storage unit or something. So that one is super fun, kind of in the product space. One in the online world that was really eye-opening to me was a dropshipping example. So dropshipping is e-commerce, but you don't touch the inventory. You set up relationships with suppliers or distributors, and they ship the product to the customer on your behalf. And this guy that I talked to was selling these giant commercial bounce houses. And he'd gone through a very specific product research process where he's like, I need the product to be, over $500. I need to get X amount of searches in Google every month. I need it to be not something that's readily available at Walmart or even Amazon. And so he was selling these like multi-$1,000 giant vinyl bounce houses. And he said he sold over $300,000 worth of them in his first year, driving traffic primarily through AdWords, but now like pay-per-click advertising, but now investing more into SEO. And so I was like, that's crazy. And like never had to touch the inventory himself.
That is wild. And I didn't even know that there were concrete polishers. And I'm wondering if my concrete's a little lackluster, if I can polish it after the fact, or is it more so in an earlier stage of concrete production that it could be polished?
Yeah, I'm not in that industry. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, you made me feel inadequate about my concrete. It doesn't shine the way it probably used to when this home was built many years ago. Well, so that is wild. And so I want to get your take then. So I guess, of course, of all the benefits to be gleaned from side hustling, I mean, one is, hey, money. Two is, I guess, stories or exercise or fun. But I guess I'm thinking for folks who do not aspire for their side hustle to go full time. Does it enrich the experience of the worker at work having a side hustle going?
I think it definitely made me a better employee, because in my corporate world, in my corporate life, I was like at the bottom rung of this Fortune 50 company where if I didn't show up, it would make zero meaningful impact to this business. Like it was like,
that doesn't feel good.
You hit your numbers, you don't hit your numbers. Like it's not a blip on the radar. Versus when I come home nights and weekends working on my side business, which was a footwear comparison shopping website at the time that would make affiliate commissions from Zappos and Amazon and these other online shoe stores. If I spent the weekend hustling and making a ton of new ads and updating the inventory, I could see the benefits of doing that to my bottom line for the rest of that week, the rest of that month. Versus at my day job, it was like I was going to get paid the same, whether or not I worked really hard or didn't. It was kind of a weird relationship. But
it was like the movie Office Space.
Yeah. Being the CEO on the side kind of helped me see the bigger picture at work too. And especially because in my job, I was interfacing with car dealers. As a manufacturer's rep for Ford. And so some of these dealers had been in business for generations. Some of them had their charters signed by Henry Ford. And, to come in as in early 20s and, tell these guys how to do their business, it was a weird kind of place to be in. But I was like, I kind of am speaking your language a little bit because, I have this business experience on the side.
Yeah, that is handy. So you got some global perspective in terms of, how the business is operating, maybe a bit more strategically. You're able to form better connections with some of the folks you're reaching out to. And how about some of the others, like your guests, if they shared some either skills they've acquired that were serving them at their day jobs as well?
So probably the thing that draws most people to side hustling is the extra income component. And when you're starting out, I kind of frame it as a side hustle snowball, kind of a reverse Dave Ramsey type of deal, where it's like I've itemized out my expenses, smallest to largest, and then I try and like line item erase them with non-job income streams. Maybe that's dividend investing, maybe that's a little bit of freelancing over here. Like, what can I erase, especially if I have an annoying expense, like, oh my gosh, my car insurance, it just bothers me that I have to pay this. I want to cross it off, make that free. I think it's kind of a fun way to build it up. But like you mentioned, building skills, working on something that's meaningful, that's challenging, that's impactful, that's creative, all of that stuff really plays into, what is a benefit of doing a side hustle work. On top of that, really empowering to earn your first income outside of your day job and to say like, oh, I'm worth more than what it says on my business card. Like I have value in a marketplace outside of my own paycheck. So I know for my wife, that was really empowering and kind of a big confidence boost for her. But let me flip it around. Like what drew you to starting the podcast on the side, and like what benefits have you seen, if any, for work?
Oh, sure thing. Well, in a way, I was sort of already, self-employed doing my thing. And I thought the podcast would be cool in terms of generating, leads for, training services and whatnot. And so it's done a little bit of that, but it's really kind of gone in new directions. I think that's what's been fun is the surprises in terms of I did not even know, what I was really getting into, but then it sort of sparks all kinds of cool things. Like I'm talking to fascinating people like yourself. And then I'm learning all sorts of things from those people, that as we're chatting in terms of, real skills as they're sharing what they know. And then sort of developing some expertise, because I've been kind of clueless sort of when it comes to marketing, I think. And now I'm getting a bit more sophisticated in terms of I can more readily, I think, call out. It's like, that's absolutely not worth it at all. I'm going to pass on that.
Well, you've clearly done something right. Like, I'm curious, what do you think attributes to the growth of the show?
Oh, sure thing. Well, I think that, I was going to ask you about idea validation as well for side hustles, but I think I started a number of businesses that didn't really produce revenue, if you will.
Sure. I think we've all been there.
I've had some folks say, you shut down because you weren't profitable. It's like, no. It's not that the profit was zero. In fact, that was negative. It's that the revenue was zero. And so even partnering with brilliant people, all the right credentials with the terms of like, fancy consultants, fancy business school degrees, brilliant intellects, and we had an idea, and I think a couple in particular. One was called Launch Point, and that was to prep folks post high school, pre-college, in that little interim summer. It's like, hey, let's give you a bunch of skills you need to excel in college and not drop out. And it was interesting that folks weren't really biting on that a whole lot. And later I learned that even some prominent marketers have tried that concept and not had as much luck. Another one was low cost online math tutoring using workers who are smart, are in the developing world and can, have a great living wage at a smaller price point.
Okay.
I thought this could be really cool. But then, it seemed like those who were low income already had sort of free tutoring services, and those who are high income wanted the very finest and had no qualms paying $50-$60 an hour for a tutor for their folks. So I think the difference here was, for the success of this show, was that I just refused. I just got fed up. It's like, I am not going to build something people don't want, even if I'm super excited about it and think they should want it. I'm just not going to do it. So I went a little bit, I wouldn't say overboard, but I spent some real time in terms of, I used 3 different quick survey tools to assess to what extent do people have an interest in listening to a podcast about, skill sharpening insights.
Okay.
And to what extent is that kind of similar to some shows, but also unique. And when I saw that those numbers looked really compelling, I said, okay, folks genuinely want this. It's not just, something I think would be fun, but I do. I think it's fun. And so I was raring to go. And I think that made the difference. It's like folks are fundamentally interested in this concept. And I see it even with my Overcast advertising, if you've ever done that, is that my taps and my clicks and my subscription rate amongst other podcasts that are advertising on the platform are like way higher than what they project. So it's like, okay, this is a resonant concept anywhere you slice. Well, you got me going, Nick. Well, since we're flipping tables back and forth, I want to get your take. When it comes to a side hustle, I think it's very easy for folks to get super excited about something they're into, fill in the blanks, artisanal candles or something. And then they maybe want to go big and say, this has got to be huge. How do you recommend mitigating risk and validating ideas before you lose all your money?
Sure. Well, that's the beauty of side hustles. Almost by definition, it's got to be low risk because it's on the side from your day job. 99% of the people I talk to, it's all bootstrap, self-funded businesses. You're not taking in outside investment capital or anything like that. So it's like, what can you get off the ground? How can you prove the model quickly, inexpensively, and see what's going to work? The biggest risk, especially from people who are still working a job, especially a job that they love, is like, what if my boss finds out? What is my employer going to think about this? Like, that's one of the bigger issues that tends to come up. Although with the data, I think it's like, half of all millennials have some sort of side hustle. 44 million Americans overall have some sort of side hustle. It's becoming more and more commonplace where it's like, okay, look, your employer doesn't own 24 hours of your time, energy, and attention. It's like, hey, look, they're paying you for these 8 hours. And after that, whether you run a marathon or run a business, like, what business is it of theirs? But on the idea validation side, the quickest thing that I found is like to actually ask somebody to buy. And we've seen this, in the physical product world. It's like, okay, I'm going to make a small bet on inventory up front rather than like, I'm going to buy a warehouse or I'm going to buy a container shipment from China. Like, okay, how can I validate this, on the cheap, on the kind of audience building side, the blogging, podcasting, YouTube side of the world. It's kind of like, what content is already out there that people are paying attention to? Can you tell if these people have been at it for a while? Does it look like they're making money, or does it look like this is just a hobby for them? You can kind of get a gauge based on some statistics. SimilarWeb.com might help you kind of gauge some traffic. TubeBuddy.com, like for YouTube, can kind of give you a gauge, although YouTube is pretty public about like, this person has 7 million views. They want to pump that person up too for social proof. And then on the service side, it really is just like, here's what I can do for you. Here's the price. Would you buy it? A friend of mine hosts these urban hiking tours in San Francisco, and she saw, walking tours and Segway tours and bike tours and bus tours. And she's like, well, shoot, I'll throw my hat in the ring. How about a hiking tour? She loved going hiking on all these, different trails within the city limits, and, found a handful of people who are like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Those people seeded her profile on TripAdvisor and some other sites with the initial reviews, and she started to get some traffic organically after that. But, she had paying customers from day one.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the key is we say, would you buy it? It's not like you're speaking in a theoretical, context. It's like, no, here and now, are you going to part with your cash, for what I got? Because there could be a world of difference between, survey hypotheticals and here we are trying to exchange.
Right.
Well, so then that's great. And I think that may take a bit of courage for some who maybe are reluctant to engage in some of the sales conversations. Have you encountered that? And do you have any pro tips for folks who are taking those first steps into selling?
It is an awkward thing, or can be an awkward thing, to stick your neck out in a way and ask for money and have confidence in the value that you're going to provide. But it gets easier over time. And you kind of recognize that nobody is awesome at it right out of the gate, and it gets more comfortable. Like, I've sold some advertising on certain sites, and it's nice to be able to say, like, here's the rates, here's the PayPal link, go. If you want this, I'll plug it in for you right away. Otherwise, no hard feelings, So it can be as simple as that. And one of the, like, when I used to sell house painting, and the close was always like, what do you think? It was like the lamest close ever, instead of like, okay, my truck's parked out front, I'm going to leave in 10 minutes. It's this price. I don't know. It's kind of a casual way to have a conversation. Like, look, we've been talking for an hour. We've walked all around your house. This is what you told me you wanted. Here's the price. What do you think?
Yeah. All right. There you have it. It's just so simple. And I like that, as I'm really putting myself in that moment, and thinking about a painter and what do you think, it also feels a lot less cheesy than, I don't know, you might encounter any number of pieces of advice associated with, so when can I schedule you for your, dream painting or something? It's like,
right,
that feels a little bit cheesy, and that's pretty presumptuous. I didn't say that.
Yeah, when can I get you on my calendar? When's good for you? I got the first week of June open.
So what do you think? All right, just that simple. That's cool. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the time element. So you mentioned that you got a number of hours outside of the 8-ish that you're doing work at your day job. And you've got some expertise when it comes to leveraging your time with virtual assistants. Can you tell us a little bit about this and how that might be an effective way to get more hustling on the side with a limited number of hours?
This is one way to kind of add some leverage to your day, in that you don't have to be the one doing all the work. I think in the early days, it probably makes sense for you to be doing it, provided it's something that you know how or could reasonably learn how to do. My first hire was like a web development team. So it's like, if I learned how to do it myself, that probably still wouldn't exist. So there's certain cases where it's like, look, I just got to hire an outside expert. But there's other cases where it's like, okay, I've been doing this myself. I have a process in place, but it's not rocket science. I don't need to be doing it myself. I could bring on some help to do that. And that's kind of really where I've had the most success in hiring outside help, is, plugging people into a specific role or task where it's getting hours of work off of my plate in exchange for just a little bit of upfront training, and saying, here's the process. Can you follow this recipe? And providing feedback and training, coaching, of course, but ultimately saying, this is your responsibility now.
And so you've taken a look at a lot of services that provide this. Have you found some that you are pretty reliably high quality and you dig?
I have a dedicated service for podcast editing that's called Podcast Fast Track. I've got a website maintenance service. Consider it kind of like website insurance at this point, where it's like, if something breaks or if I want to change something, they're kind of on call 24 hours a day, and just, send them a note. Hey, can you move this thing? Because I've gone down the rabbit hole of trying to tweak things myself and hitting refresh and being like, oh no, I got the white screen of death in WordPress. It's bad news. That's called ZenWP, is the service I use over there. They've been really good. But it's really kind of itemizing out where your time is going and saying, okay, could somebody else do this as well or better than me? Or is my time better spent elsewhere? And that's kind of how I've gone about the delegation phase. And I'm still learning. We just got off a call this afternoon about like, dude, you really need to hire like the executive assistant right-hand person type of role. And here's why, and here's how to do it. So that's probably next on my plate.
Oh, cool. And so then I'm thinking if folks they're eager, they're hungry, they say, you know what, side hustles sound really cool. I've got a number of ideas. What do you recommend might be some of the very first steps? And if you don't have a whole lot of extra time or money, but you want to, get a taste, what are some of the starting tidbits you'd recommend?
Starting points. If you're in the idea searching phase, I can encourage you to hit up sidehustlenation.com/ideas. That's my constantly updated laundry list of part-time ways to make extra money that you can start today. No opt-in required over there. If you're the person that has a handful of ideas and you're trying to debate, well, which should I take action on? Which would be most worthwhile to pursue? You can create kind of a weighted decision matrix with a handful of questions that, might be pertinent, like how excited am I about this? What's it going to cost to start up? What's the profit potential long term? Is this scalable, or could I eventually remove myself from the day-to-day operation? You can come up with 8 or 10 different questions kind of along those lines, like projecting out 12 months or 24 months, and kind of assign a number score to each of those and see what the little matrix spits out. And you might find, well, crap, that's not the one I really want to work on. It's like, well, go with your gut in that case. So I've gone through that exercise a handful of different times, and your gut will tell you if the numbers lie.
I've done that exact thing. Boy, I don't remember exactly the context, but I was in college and I had to figure out, okay, I got a summer options, there's some travel, there's some trips. And then I thought about, okay, what are my criteria? What am I going to score them at? And then as I really just forcing myself to think through them just made me realize, I don't think that would be that much fun. I don't want to do this. Like, how did this even get to be a finalist in the first place?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love that. Is like you do the numbers, but you're by no means a slave to them. It's just the process itself can be rather informative.
And that's the last thing you need is a second job that you hate. So I think that's a really important piece of this, especially if you're in the position of like, hey, works okay, works good. I'm not struggling to make rent next month. Like, okay, then don't start a side hustle doing something that compromises your enjoyment.
Yeah, I'm with you. And let's say you're a little bit farther down the track. You're like, holy smokes, it looks like people are really into this side hustle. Maybe it should be my full hustle. Are there any sort of telltale signs or indicators that it might be a nice time to jump?
Telltale signs, probably a couple. The first is the track record of revenue. So a lot of people are out to replace their day job salary, which is awesome, but kind of hard to do on a part-time basis. If you think about it, like, man, you built something that's legitimately time leveraged if you manage to do that. Probably the more important metric is to cover your expenses. Like, does this cover my monthly fixed costs? If so, fantastic, especially given an extra 40, 50 hours a week to dedicate to it. Like, look at that upside, right? Like, if I've been able to get it here part-time, think about what I'll be able to do when I go full-time. The second thing is, like, if you can't stop thinking about it, if you only had more time, like if you're super energized and energetic about it, and it's like, okay, now is the time to make the leap. Some friends of ours gave the example of like, they were quitting their job to pursue some business in like electronic motorcycles or something. And they're like, well, what happens if it doesn't work out? I'll go get another job. Like, it's okay. And so it's kind of the, think of the downside risk, usually not as life-threatening or as damaging as we probably make it out to be.
Yeah, I hear that. It's like worst case scenario, I burned through my savings and I had 1 or 2 or 3 years of fun with these motorcycles, and we can resume. So that's good. And maybe this is a nitty gritty question, but I know some, when they're considering making a leap, health insurance in particular is a sticking point. Any pro tips on that front?
A lot of my friends in the personal finance space use a health sharing service. It usually has a Christian component to it. Like, you got to swear on the Bible to uphold Christian values. Liberty Health Share is one that is probably less Bible thumping than MediShare, which is the other popular one. But those two have significantly lower costs than going on the national healthcare exchanges. The risk is it's not insurance, and they won't tell you that it's insurance, and that's how they get around the federal mandate loopholes. But the cost savings are attractive enough that a lot of people are putting their trust and faith in those.
Sure thing. And I guess so it's not insurance, but I mean, at the end of the day, they pay your hospital bills, right? So it effectively...
Yes. So they pay your claims. The question is just like, I'm curious, like, okay, how big is your risk pool? If somebody gets terminal cancer, like, what are you gonna cover? Like, it's a weird thing where it's a little bit scary to me. I still have health coverage through my wife who works full time. So it's, we look at it as a team sport, but if she was ever to leave that job, we would probably just go with one of the off the shelf plans and just chalk that up as a crazy expensive monthly expense.
Yeah, I hear you, but I guess now I'm thinking you got my wheels turning. Just like you said, hey, what's the worst that can happen? I guess maybe it's like you got to buy real insurance over the long term. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a significant number to add to your line item budget.
Yeah. Totally.
For our family, the last I looked, it was probably $1,200 a month minimum for pretty crappy coverage.
Mm-hmm. Such is the American challenge these days.
Your Canadian listeners are like, what are they talking about?
What's that about? We love our Canadian listeners. Thank you. Well, tell me any other things you want to make sure to mention before we hear a few of your favorite things.
The biggest thing for me is to think of your side hustle as an experiment. Kind of put on your scientist hat and say, okay, my hypothesis is this is going to work. But if it doesn't, that's not the end of my experiment. Like, I'm going to go pivot back to something else, taking what I learned from that and move on to the next thing. So in that way, like, what I've really found is that failure is inevitable in a lot of cases. Like, you're probably not going to hit a home run in your first at bat. But on the other hand, it's also impossible because you take something away from every experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, now could you share a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
The one that I probably point to is Thomas Edison's, "We don't know a millionth of 1% about anything."
Yeah, I find that comforting, actually. And how about a favorite book?
A favorite book for me is The Go-Giver by Bob Berg. It's about...
Oh, yeah, we had him on the show.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's so you know all about it. It's about providing value first, being helpful first, and that really kind of solidified a mindset shift for me. Was I got into the business for the noble purpose of like, how do I make extra money? And it was like, well, money follows value. Like, how can you be of service to others? That was an important read for me.
And how about a favorite tool, something you use to be awesome at your job?
How about Text Expander?
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I got a ton of these. Text Expander is awesome for like, these keyboard shortcuts and snippets. And LastPass is something that probably couldn't live without.
And a favorite habit?
Go-to habit is the practice of naming your top 3 priorities for tomorrow the night before. So when you wake up, you know exactly what to work on and in what order. So you don't have this, 45-minute ramp up period of like, well, what should I do today? Let's see what's going on Facebook. It's like, no, yesterday Nick said this was what's important. Let's go.
All right. And is there a particular nugget you share that seems to resonate with folks? They quote it back to you a lot?
The Side Hustle Show soundbite I probably refer to most often is from Ryan Finley way back in episode 72, when he said, the best opportunities aren't visible until you're already in motion. And when he said that, and this was probably 2014, I was like, yeah, it sounds kind of hippie. But over the years, I've really recognized that to be so, so true. It's the, once you get started, it's so much easier to stay started. And the conversations that you have and the ideas that come up as you're working, as you're doing it, like, you never would have come to you had you just still been sitting on the sidelines. So the best opportunities aren't visible until you're already in motion. So that's my biggest challenge, like getting people off the sidelines and into the game. Because once you do, it's like you could see the Matrix, all the lights go off.
And if folks want to learn more or get in touch with you, where'd you point them?
SideHustleNation.com is the home base. We mentioned SideHustleNation.com/ideas as a good place to start. And just Nick@SideHustleNation.com is email.
And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks seeking to be awesome at their jobs?
Yeah. Maybe you could consider this as the challenge, is to think of the skills and interests and areas of expertise that you already have and see how that might apply to a side hustle. So, for example, on my resume in the past, I was a ski instructor. So I could say, well, what if I did private ski lessons? I was working at a cashier at a restaurant. I was handling money. Like, maybe I could do bookkeeping for certain businesses. Not every job or not every, thing on your resume is going to naturally translate to, a freelance service. But I think you can get the creative juices flowing with, okay, what inventory of my existing skills has demand in the market? And that's probably a good place to start for looking at a potential side hustle.
Well, Nick, thank you. This has been a treat. I wish you tons of luck as you're side hustling and equipping others to do the same. So keep it up.
Thanks for having me.
I really liked Nick's take on how the side hustle he thinks of it as an experiment. And from every experience there, you take away something. And sometimes that something is the ability to think more strategically, put yourself in the customer's shoes, the CEO or owner of an organization that you're serving, because you are that person in your side hustle. So I thought that was pretty handy, as well as how he removed a lot of the fear associated with a sale or a request. You just sort of lay it out. Okay, this is what we're looking at. And then, so what do you think? Nothing to be afraid of. That's not pushy. That's not aggressive. That's not manipulative. Hey, this is what we got. What do you think? I like that. That sort of removed some of my own little tidbits of anxiety and trepidation that are still there when I make an ask or do some marketing and sales type things. But I'm getting better. And I hope you are too. Again, if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items we've referenced, it's over at awesomeatyourjob.com/F456. If you haven't already, hope you'll push subscribe. If you do, you'll catch our next guest. It's a fun guy. His name is Gret Glyer, and he is just really cool and kind. And he is behind the organization DonorSee, and he is talking about fundraising and storytelling and how you can be extra persuasive in those environments in a really cool context of doing good that his organization is up to. So hope you catch you there. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. And peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.